Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm joined today by Israeli criminologist Sagit Yehoshua, and today with Sagit we'll talk about the mind of terrorists, how they work and why people are attracted by terrorism and things of the sort. Thanks for your time, Sagit. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, as I said, you're a criminologist. You are based in Israel. Would you like to tell us something about your background so that we can give my viewers a full picture before going into the details of what we have to discuss today?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure. And yeah, I started my career as a criminologist working with criminals, and I realized that I'm fascinated by the human mindset, the human being, how they think, how they operate, what motivates them. And that led me to, the field of profiling, which is exactly what it is, to understand the human mind better in order to understand how to, whether mitigating the threats or understanding how to deal with the phenomena better. And it's not just an individual, it's also, a community or a group or an organization. And yeah, I found it fascinating. And in Israel, as you probably know, it's a place where terrorism is something that we experience on a daily basis, something that since the initiation of the state, this is something that is quite dominant in the country. And I was focusing and specializing on the aspect of terrorism. In Israel, it wasn't that popular or developed, so I did most of my studies and my work for quite a few years in the UK. And over there, I, was exposed to, Daesh and foreign fighters and radicalization process, things that weren't the same here in Israel. And I found it very intriguing, understanding that terrorism is not the same in different places around the world. And we need to, adjust ourselves and understanding the different threats in different locations. And I find it, very interesting. And when I came back to Israel, I initiated this sort of a method, more holistic approach to understanding the human mindset. And I've been working with terrorists for quite a while, whether in prison, whether, in other, places. And since 7th of October, it's been even more intense, because everything I learned and believed and known for a long time, I think shifted a little bit. I think what we've experienced forced me to see things a bit differently, whether throughout my years, I was able to communicate with terrorists and have a very meaningful and deep conversation. I mean, of course, we didn't agree on most of the topics, but we were able to communicate, and there was a lot of respect and understanding, and I felt like something has changed, because the people I encounter since 7th of October are people that are a lot more full of hate and in a place where there's no respect. Not, I couldn't get through them. The communication was different. And I realized that, there's different types of terrorists. People are exposed to different information. Even the concept of, brainwash, which I didn't like all these years. And I don't believe that, a person can be only brainwashed. He has to have his own mind. I realized that once they're like isolated and are completely in a place where they get only one sort of information, then their mind is completely diverted into that specific knowledge, and that's shaped their mindset. So today I'm teaching the topics at university. My PhD was on the profile of leaders of terrorist groups in Israeli prisons, and teaching the aspects of profiling and terrorism and the psychology of terrorism. And I'm also doing a lot of work with the different institutions, whether the IPS, the Israeli Prison Service, or the army, or wherever I can assist in that respect, and as a consultant to different companies and institutions.
I think that the first question that people ask you when we start discussing this is, what brings people to want to become a terrorist? What brings people, what triggers the interest and the willingness to join terrorist organizations?
I think the motivations to become terrorists has slightly changed during the years. I mean, there is a strong base that is common for every terrorist, which is involved in the aspects of empowerment and feeling of the need for respect, and the need for like a strong identity, and living in a place where you feel like you have your own place and you're being treated equally and you're getting the right treatment, and the needs that you acquire are like, especially like all the deprivation that you have, are fulfilled by the government or the people that you live by. And that was throughout the years. I think in the 70s and 80s, the ideology was very, very strong. It was very social ideology. People were gathering in groups, fighting for a right cause. Whether it's a corrupted government or an occupation. There wasn't a lot of religion back then, but then religion came into the scene, and it's changed a lot the motivations of terrorists. When people feel like their religion is not being respected, it's a bit stronger, because it's not their own interest. It's something that comes from above, and this is something that you can't argue with. So terrorism has changed in that respect, and I think today it changed even further to a place where people are a lot more individualistic, rather than within a group, and they think for themselves. They feel like they're part of a lot of things, a lot of groups, but it's all in the back of their hands. It's sort of an illusion. So you're a lot more individualistic, but you also want to feel empowered, and you'll do it many times by yourself. You don't need to be part of an organization, and you will get the empowerment that you need from all the followers and all the people that will see you online. And that is a completely different mindset of a terrorist that we've been used to before. It doesn't have to be sociable. He doesn't have to be part of a group. He doesn't have to accept authority. He doesn't have to accept any orders or instructions. It's completely different. If he will succeed, then he will get a lot of success and empowerment, and if he won't, nobody will know about it. So I mean, it's a win-win situation. So it's a completely different mindset.
But what brings people to choose one terrorist organization instead of another? I think, based on my ignorance, that this is mostly based on proximity, meaning that if I'm in Lebanon, I will probably want to join Hezbollah. If I'm in Afghanistan, I would like to join either al-qaeda or ISIS-Khorasan. And if I'm in Palestine, I would like to join Hamas. Is that all, or are there different reasons why a person chooses one organization instead of another?
Well, I don't believe that there is one element that affect everything. I'm sure that there are intervening elements that influence and shape your mindset before you make a decision. but definitely the opportunity and the proximity and what you learn to know and familiarize yourself with, is that where you go? Many terrorists I spoke with told me, like, if I was born somewhere else, then if it's a criminal, environment, then I would have gone to drugs, right? To use drugs, and not to, participate in a terrorist organization. But where I live, that's what we have. That's what we know. That's what that these are the people that we meet, and and once, I've learned about it, sounds good, I went for it. But if the circumstances were different, then I might have chosen differently.
A lot of these zones that we mentioned, such as Afghanistan, Iraq, and many others, of course, are very poor zones or even civil war zones. Is poverty part of the social context that brings people to becoming terrorists? Is that part of the equation? What I mean is, are terrorist leaders more like powerful in convincing poor people, if that makes sense?
Look, money is never like a one single factor to lead someone to join a terrorist organization or commit violence. By itself, it doesn't stand. Okay, it has to come with other intervening elements, such as a feeling of, of despair, not seeing any proper future, and not being, feeling that you're not treating well, that others have things that you don't. I mean, there's so many other elements that are relevant, because there's many people that are poor around the world that don't have means, but they're happy and they don't feel any need to join terrorism. It has to come with some other intervening elements that are around and relevant and dominant in the area.
Well, my last question has a second side. That is, how do you explain that people from the middle class who are actually educated become terrorists as well? The first two examples that come to my mind are Mohammed Atta, who was an architect, and Ziad Jarrah, who was the pilot for a flight United 93 that crashed the plane in close to Pittsburgh, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, on 9/11. That guy was taking engineering. How do you explain that?
That's exactly, the continuation of what I said earlier. It's not a matter of means. It's a matter of how do you feel about your place in the world. People that have a lot, and I think if you look at terrorism, as I said, in the 70s and the 80s, the profile of these people were middle class. And why is that? Because students went to universities, wanted to do something good with themselves, wanted to contribute to the world, to feel empowered. And there was loads of reason to fight for, like corrupted governments and, feeling that you're a second-class citizens. And people felt like they want to contribute. I have a lot, but I'm miserable and I don't have a future, and I can't feel good about myself when the world looks like that, when the governments are so corrupted. So people that are poor, in most cases, they have other things to worry about. They don't have the energy to fight for a noble cause. It's more the people that have a lot to lose that mostly, feel the need to be ideological and do something for society. And you can definitely see that in many cases as the ones that you mentioned.
Well, what is the role of charismatic leaders in convincing potential followers? I'm thinking here about, for instance, al-Baghdadi, and of course, the most famous one is Osama bin Laden. But other terrorist organizations don't have strong leaders like them. So what is the difference? How do these people convince people, and what is their role?
Well, leaders have a lot of influence on the followers because the cause is so extreme that they need to be very convincing. And most of these leaders are very charismatic, verbal. They know how to sell the ideology. and they base their, ideology on whether it's a religion or whether it's an ideology, national ideology that is very, very strong. And they know how to press the buttons that needed in order to affect and in order to influence their audience. They know what their audience need. I think you can definitely see this with Hamas and with Daesh, that managed to influence so many foreign fighters that lives in, for example, Europe, feeling like they're being treated badly, like they're not sure about their identity. Am I European? Am I Afghan from Afghan? What am I? Um, and these organizations, press on these buttons, and they gave them the answers to all the grievances that they felt. So it was, for them, it was, I want to be there. I want to be part of it. And Osama bin Laden is definitely a leader that is known to be very ideological, very extreme in his ideology, and very even paranoid from thinking it's us and them. And when everything is black or white, it makes things clear for somebody that needs that clarity. And I think that's drawn a lot of people towards committing, being part of the organizations and committing these acts in the
Let's
name.
move to oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, in the name of the organization or in the name of the ideology.
Let's move to the war that is currently going on in Israel. How can someone be convinced of taking part in something so horrible like what Hamas started on October 7th?
I think it's a very, very long process. Things since 2007, Gaza is completely isolated. Hamas took control over Gaza, and it's been nearly 20 years that they're in charge of the education, they're in charge of everything that is happening in Gaza. People are completely dependent on them. And I think the people that committed these atrocities, these young people who were born and raised under the wing of Hamas, uh, they were raised to hate. They raised to put all the blame on the other side, not to take any responsibility for their situation. Definitely not to put Hamas as a responsible for their situation. And as I said, I met these people, and they were completely blocked. I think that once they saw us after, as I said, nearly 20 years of the just hearing, horrible things about us, they demonized us so badly that when they actually saw us, they were confused. They didn't know what to do with themselves, because it was like, something that you learn to hate for so many years, and suddenly it's right in front of you. And I think that, like, that erupted, like this hatred and this demonization and this, erupted so strongly, like all their miseries and frustration, and came into this one peak time where they have the opportunity to do whatever they want, and they just went for it. And add to this the normalization of violence that Daesh, add into the scene, since Daesh put all these horrendous videos with these horrendous acts. It normalized it. It normalized rape. It normalized violence. Normalized horrific act that once you see it, at the beginning you're like horrified, but when you see it again and again, you get used to it. That's the human nature. And these people were like open to this horrendous violence, normalizing these acts that beforehand weren't normalized. And when these two came together, the hate and the normalization of violence, that led to these horrific acts, which I'm pretty sure that the leadership of Hamas even didn't imagine that it would get to it, because Hamas is a religious organization that wants legitimacy. And what they've done is completely against Islam and Islam rules. So there's a conflict here. And I think that they need to find ways to balance that conflict. I think the fact that they completely denied the horrors, and that's what they sell to the world, that I can hear even colleagues of mine that said, did it happen? It didn't happen. I'm not sure. It's just an exaggeration. I said, there's videos of that. I mean, it's documented. You can see it. But today, people, the truth, it's everything can be fake, because there's so much fake out there that people don't know what to believe anymore. And I think how Hamas is selling it is doing an amazing job, unfortunately, in terms of influencing the audience. And that puts us in a very, very difficult position.
Well, you already explained some of what I'm going to ask next, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. How do you explain, since you're somebody who studies the human mind, that some people in the West Bank and in Gaza actually support Hamas?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of them. Like, the percentages are really, really high, and which is really sad and disturbing. I think Hamas gave them some power that they didn't have for a long time. Hamas, in its core, is not necessarily corrupted and is very ideological. And people are fed up from Fatah and the Palestinian Authority and their corruptions and complete uselessness. That they're searching for something strong. They're searching for something with a stand. I do think that after what happened on 7th of October, a lot of them took a step back. But still, the percentages are still high. And I think it's all to the fact that people don't believe that some of the things that have happened, don't want to believe it happened, prefer to stick to the position of, I have something good and strong to hold on to, and I'm not backing up from it. And I think it's very, very problematic.
What is the general feeling among the population in Palestine towards Israel? I mean, how can the hate be so strong and last so long? Is it based on decades of tension between the two, I cannot say states, but between the two areas?
I think it's a very long process of, I think it's based on the Nakba. In 48, history will say that in 48, what happened, we agreed to the partition plan, Palestinian didn't, there was a big war, and we won. And since then, it's been, in the culture, in the Arab culture, honor is the most important thing. And unfortunately, a lot of the conflicts in the Middle East based on this stupid phrase of honor. And I think that this is something, and I have a lot of colleagues that are specialized in the Arab culture. They said there will never be peace, because whenever it's based on honor, and we disgrace the Arab nations' honor by winning Israel. And this is something that they will never agree to. They will never put aside and say, you know what, let's just have two states, just two people. We did have that fantasy for a few years, but at the moment, it feels like it will never, be possible. And I think that the more they are being oppressed, unfortunately, by their own people. Okay, we weren't in control of Hamas or of Gaza. Hamas was in control of Gaza. I mean, Gaza wasn't occupied, but it's still, They diverted all their hate towards us, not towards, the ones that are being humiliating and depriving them for all these years. I mean, they get so much money from all over the world, and you can definitely see what it was used for instead of building a future and investing in education and buildings. They invested in tunnels and weapons, and I think that says it all. And the fact that the people still can't see it, even though there is some um, signs of rebellion, but it's very, very, very little, unfortunately, very little. And I think, unfortunately, unless they will change the education that is completely against Israelis and Jews, and completely, teach to hate and not to respect the others and whatever. As long as this is the education, we will grow generations over generations of people that only hate and only wants to kill and use violence. And and it's very difficult because we can't apply, education on them. It needs to come from them. And I think that's the main problem. And hopefully, maybe if UNRWA won't be relevant anymore, which I hope so, I don't think that UNRWA did justice or did any good to the Palestinian people. On the other hand, they, kept their, refugee status. They didn't let them move on. They didn't let them grow up from that, difficulties and learn how to live, in peace. And I think that hopefully maybe this war will allow for other voices to come and to teach and to be heard, and different education. I hope so. I mean, I don't know, but I really hope that at least something like that will be possible now.
Does it work both ways? Meaning, do people in Israel have the same feelings towards people in Palestine?
Some of them, absolutely. And I think in the last few years, I think we got to this situation because the right wing voices that are against Palestinian and against the two-state solution are getting stronger and stronger. I think it is sort of a reaction because like the peace movement and the activists that were very strong got weaker because there was no success. I mean, there's a lot of terrorist attacks, still a lot of wars. People fed up. People felt, you know what, there is nobody to talk to on the other side, so we will choose differently. And I think that's the reason we have such a right-wing government at the moment. People were looking for something strong. People were looking for something different. I think it's a phenomenon that we can see around the world as well. I mean, see the leaders that we have. I don't want to point names, but I mean, some leaders that are being elected, it's just unbelievable, unbelievable that, they gain so much power. But it feels like the world is going to the extreme because the center wasn't very useful.
I would say that even in Italy, I don't understand how such people can be elected, but it is what it is. Well, I think that there's something that we tend to forget, that is that also soldiers need mental health support. So as far as you know, what is the Israeli army doing to support their soldiers during these days, these hard days?
It's a very, very sensitive issue. It's very difficult. I have two brothers that's 4 months in Gaza now. They experienced a lot of very, very difficult things. We understand that now better than we did in previous conflicts, because there were shortages and it was a bit different. But now they have to go through some therapy before they go back to society, go back to their work. They get like 2 weeks holiday just to relax, to see some therapists. some need it more than others. You know, it really depends on the situation or the person himself. So we do try to, you know, offer them any help that they need. There's also other organizations that are not related to the government, that are independent, that are helping. But it's definitely a very complicated thing. Both my brothers feel like, oh my God, how am I going back to my life, my normal life? How am I going back to my job? It looks so useless. It looks so, you know, it's not worth anything. I mean, you know, I mean, I've done something that is so meaningful and so strong, and now everything seems worthless. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot, you know, it's very difficult for these mostly very young people, men and women. But hopefully, I mean, we will be able to give them the help they need.
Well, Sagit, I think that you gave us a very important overview about these very sensitive topics. We covered terrorism in general, we covered the war in Israel. So I think that this discussion we had was very interesting, and I think that my viewers will agree with me that this was very interesting and unusual. We covered some unusual topics. So thanks again for your time.
I'm very happy to hear that, and I hope that we can speak in better times for Israel and for the world. I mean, it feels like, as a profiler that is investigating leaders and trying to understand their mindset, it feels like most of the leaders that we have around the world, not just in Israel, also in Israel, but around the world, are incompetent, and they lead us to, you know, bad places. And I hope that will change. And I hope that, you know, we will be able to be led by people that are, you know, capable and you know, ideological in a positive way. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. I totally agree with your hopes, and I also share them.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody else for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.